I talked to you on Tuesday, I told you I wanted you to start this trial with a clean slate. That's what we asked you in Starkville. That's what I've asked you on Tuesday. Before we ever put on any evidence, I didn't want you to have any agenda. I wanted you to be able to listen to the proof and decide for yourself. The reason I presented our opening argument the way I did is because I wanted to make sure that that remained intact. I told you what I knew that the state could prove up until that 6 o'clock hour, 6:30 hour. I didn't go any farther than that in our opening statement. I wanted you to hear this evidence for yourself. Everything I told you that you would hear from the witness stand from that morning until 6:30, you've already heard. You heard that the first responders responded to Herring Road in Panola County, 2nd District, on December the 6th of 2014. They responded to a car fire. Not a single one of them had a clue what they were about to embark on. There's not a single one of them that could have been prepared for what they were about to walk into. First responders arrived on that scene. You've been there. You've been there during the daytime, so you could see everything. You've been there at night, so you could hear everything, and you couldn't hear everything. You heard the minimum amount of noise that would have been involved on that scene. There would have been multiple trucks, sirens, first responders. You heard Dr. Hickerson talk about, was Jessica in shock? Yes. But those first responders would have also been in shock. You've heard the differing testimony, but you've also heard the sound. I asked specifically what types of sounds that she was able to make. I don't have any doubt that Jessica Chambers wanted to communicate with the first responders. I don't have any doubt she had all the desire in the world. I apologize to you. I had to step out early yesterday evening. I think the judge told you that I had an obligation that I agreed to fulfill. You know, growing up, when you have success in anything, I wanted to be a professional athlete. I had the desire. I had all the want to in the world. But there were some problems with that. I wasn't the biggest guy in the world. I wasn't the strongest guy in the world. I certainly wasn't the fastest guy in the world. And the fact is, at a point in my athletic career, I had to decide that I wasn't good enough to do that. The problem is, those not being big enough, not being fast enough, not being strong enough, those are things that were facts. Those are things that were knowns. And as hard as I tried, those are things that were never going to change. Dr. Hickerson testified to you in regards to Jessica Chambers' condition. She had adrenaline. She had the desire. And absolutely, did she want to communicate? I have no doubt. But starting with what even Dr. Higdon told you what it takes to produce articulate speech, Dr. Hickerson told you Jessica did not have. It was like she had a cast around her body. She was constricted so tight by that leathered torso, that leathered skin, that she couldn't get air out. In her airway, she had thermal injuries, as was testified by Dr. Barnhart and Dr. Hickerson, that she had soot in her airways. It was red. And she had thermal, or what Dr. Hickerson testified were chemical injuries which affected her ability to speak. And worst of all, her throat, her tongue, her mouth, her lips were sustained with 3rd-degree burns. He talked about those lips being leather, all right, would not move. That tongue, even Dr. Barnhart told you the blood vessels were still pumping. When they say the interior is atraumatic, that's true. The interior is still working, but that outside just was a hard cover, and it swelled. It almost swelled out of her mouth. Just like me wanting to be a professional athlete, Jessica Chambers wanted to speak, had the desire to speak. But just like me, when it came to those facts that kept me from accomplishing my goal, there were facts, there are knowns that the doctors told you would keep her from accomplishing that goal. Jessica Chambers was just unable to articulate what she wanted to talk about. She was unable to tell them. You heard the sounds they made, and Dr. Higdon says, yes, she could have made a sound, but not anything that you could try to understand. I think these first responders went out there and they walked into a scene, and you heard them testify, and the way it sounds, that it was one talk to her, who did this to you, move along. One talk to her, who did this to you, move along. One talk to her. The fact is, Daniel Cole told you when he got to the scene, he reached down and wanted to know her name. She was so quiet he had to get down in her face, as Dr. Hickerson told you she would be. And she said, "Ah." Daniel Cole wanted to help. Daniel Cole didn't do anything wrong. He's trying. And he turned around and told them, "I think I heard Eric." And it spread like wildfire out there. We were able to, early on in this investigation, investigators along with call him Agent Rowlett, he doesn't like that, Analyst Rowlett, were able to listen to what they were saying and understand there was some conflicts in the stories. But even though that was the case, we still looked into every single Eric and Derek that lived in this area, as Paul told you, that lived in surrounding counties. Ended up that anybody that might have had contact, which in fact none did. There were two that we mentioned that even were Facebook friends. I don't know if you guys are on Facebook or not. Unfortunately, I am sometimes. But Facebook, you end up with a lot of friends that you hadn't seen in forever. They're just old school friends that I have no contact with on my phone. Most of my friends, they know my phone number. She had zero contact with either one of these individuals. In fact, they didn't even live in the same area. They were just common Facebook friends. That's the only two Erics and Derricks that ever show up with her at all. On her records at all. They went outside. They went not only to the Erics and Derricks that may have been first circle friends, which there weren't, to second, these are friends of friends of Keisha's they looked into, just to make sure. Because at that point, that was a key thing that we were looking at. Paul Rowlett also told you we did not stop our investigation there. We would be crazy to stop our investigation at one name. We moved on past the Erics and Derricks, and we looked at numerous leads, numerous people. A couple of those you've heard of today. You heard from Boone, I call him Boone Mister, George Mister. Did they interview George Mister? Yes. Why? Because they had contact. He had contact with them early in the day. With Jessica early in the day. We saw it on video that they saw each other at the store. Anybody that she had contact with, we wanted to know about. We want to know if maybe they would have been with her later. He told you he was interviewed that day, and he went home that day. Toya Taylor testified. She's a mother. She testified they wanted to talk to my son because his name was Eric. Well, what did we tell you during the investigation? We made sure we looked at every single Eric and Derek imaginable that lived in that area and in Panola County. He was one of them. He wasn't arrested. She drove him up to the sheriff's department. He gave an interview. He went home. He didn't have anything to do with this girl. That's doing your job from an investigative standpoint. If we don't go interview those Erics and Derricks, you would have heard about it today. We didn't do it. So we made sure we did. Which leads us back to the individual that as investigators began to look and include and exclude people from this investigation, they weren't looking to pick on one person. If they would have gone through and gotten that location data, and as I asked Paul Rowlett, if it would have backed up everything Quentin Tellis had already told us, what would we have done? We'd have moved right on, because that's how you conduct an investigation. But that wasn't the case. I told you in the beginning that when we pulled that location data, that Quentin Tellis had obviously not been truthful with investigators, and he had lied. When we went and interviewed him again and confronted him, he said, "I want to see it. I want to see it." So Paul Rowlett comes in the room and shows it to him. What does he tell us then? Well, I did go to Batesville. I went with Big Mike. I went Big Mike's truck. I'm not going to go into full length about Big Mike. I think you've heard the testimony from Big Mike. Big Mike took his white Denali. He went to Nashville, and they had a big time. In fact, the Giants won the football game. You heard from Travis Carr. Travis Carr went with him. Travis Carr had proof on his phone that he went. I told you everything about that third interview, coming back, talking to Big Mike, realizing that, you know what, Quentin lied to us again. Quentin is lying to us, and we knew it. Quentin and Jessica were together in Batesville on those phone records, and ultimately when they went down and talked to him about Big Mike, said, no, man, he wasn't with you. And what'd he say? Yeah, okay, I did. We rode together. And he told them the route, which matched her phone records. They came back. And leading up into the 6:30 hour, I told you from the beginning that Jessica Chambers and Quentin Tellis would be together near Quentin's home. I didn't go any farther with you in opening arguments in regards to their contact. I wanted you to have that clean slate that you could put your picture on. I wanted to be able to put evidence on and draw on that slate. Now you've heard all the evidence. You know that from 5:34 to around the 6:30 hour, Jessica and Quentin went to Taco Bell in Batesville and turned around and came back. Based on Quentin's own statements and Jessica's own telephone records, you know that they were in an area around his house. He said they were at his house, but we also know one thing. Is your mom and sister there? They would freak out if they see me, was the quote. They hung out in another area, which is exactly where the major portion of her phone pattern was, which is also exactly leading into 726, an area that we had eyes on with that camera. We had eyes on his driveway the whole time. Fortunately, that store was sitting there. At 7:09, Uncle Sammy comes out of there, and as he told you, and I say Paul Rowlett told you, we thought that when we saw that car coming out of the driveway, we thought that might be Jessica when he was first watching it, because he didn't, he didn't know. Well, luckily, that vehicle comes straight across the store, and we see it's Uncle Sammy. Quentin identifies him as Uncle Sammy. We interview Uncle Sammy. From 7:09 to 7:26, there's no more activity from that driveway. At 7:26 is when the first movement we see, and it comes out of that lower driveway. You've seen it, you're going to have it with you. In that lower driveway, that vehicle turns south and heads down Highway 51. At 7:26, Paul Rowlett told you that it would take approximately 3 to 4 minutes to drive that area from the area Quentin Tellis' home down to the crime scene. 7:26 it leaves. 7:30, Jessica Chambers' phone arrives on the crime scene at Heron Road. 4 minutes later. When that vehicle leaves, her phone shifts with it. Jessica Chambers was in that vehicle coming from that area south of Quentin's home. Now let's think about what they would have seen when they went down. At 7:30, the fire department's report says that they cleared that fire at Julia Chambers' home. So when that vehicle turned at 7:26 and went down 51, you've seen everything. They would have passed right past that house, which you can see off 51, where all of the emergency lights would have been. Shortly after Jessica Chambers arrives on Heron Road, Sherry Flowers is at a repass. What do we know about Sherry Flowers' route? It would have been the same route that Jessica and Quentin would have taken down to the crime scene, but she would have come from Carlisle behind the store and then headed down 51. What did she tell you? She didn't see emergency lights. Would she have seen them asked by the defense? Yeah, I would have noticed. Which makes sense, because about 2 minutes, 3 minutes after Jessica and Quentin pass, when you see them leave, those lights were gone. Sherry Flowers comes behind. She goes to her home, 74 Main Street. She tells you she pulls up, stops, takes a left, goes in the driveway to her home to get her grandchildren some coats. I don't doubt that at all. Coincidentally, directly across the street from her home, where she had pulled up, come to a stop to take a left, is where some keys were found. What do we know about those keys? Well, one, we know those are keys that belong to Jessica Chambers, keys to the vehicle that was burned on Heron Road. We took DNA samples, sent those keys off for DNA. You've heard Catherine Rogers testify that even the strongest DNA test that they have is going to tell you, I cannot exclude an individual. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that DNA evidence is 100% accurate. What I can tell you is that Quentin Tellis's DNA on those keys cannot be excluded to a 99.7% accuracy. 99.7% of other people can be excluded from that DNA, but he can't, and his male relatives on his father's side can't. As Paul Rowlett told you, we've heard a lot about female relatives that Quentin Tellis had in this area. We're not aware of any male relatives from his mother's side, and then also not from his father's side. We hadn't heard from any of. We hadn't heard about any of them, and we didn't uncover any of those. Sherry Flowers tells you that she leaves her residence and starts heading back toward Main Street. You've seen all these points. And as she's headed back towards Main Street, she tops the hill and she sees a man, or a young man, she described it. She described what he was wearing. You've seen all of that. I won't go back through it. But what she tells you is that when she approaches him, she did not recognize him. She had never seen him. She has no contact with Quentin Tellis. But you know right now that that was Quentin Tellis. And the reason you know, because he identified himself. He said, I need a ride up to my Aunt Julia's house to check on her because there had been a fire. Would he have known there was a fire there? Absolutely. We've already talked about the time when that vehicle left. It drove right by. She said, I know Julia Chambers, so jump in. He gets in, takes them up. Where do you want us to drop us off? Where do you want me to drop you off? Drops us off right in the mouth. 50 yards from Julia's house. I asked her, if he would have asked you to take him to Julia Chambers' driveway, would you have taken him in the driveway? She said, sure I would. Because she knew Julia. That's not where he wanted to go. He needed to get up that hill because he left something behind. As he gets up to the top of that hill, he gets out of the car and he walks to his sister's house. What do we know during this time? We know that at that point, his phone had been dead silent outside of one call in Batesville to his sister from 5:34 to 7:42. And at 7:42, it's 2.5 hours. Who does he call? He calls Jessica. And then he turns around 1 minute later and sends Jessica a text unlike any we have ever seen him send her before. Good night, sweet dreams, babe. I'll call you tomorrow. Why does he tell us that he blew her off that night? He tells us he blew her off. First he tells them because he's going to see Jamie Shaw. Scott Meadows asked him in that meeting, well, if we go interview Jamie Shaw, what's she going to tell us? Well, no, hold on. It wasn't Jamie Shaw. It was my girlfriend, Chiquita, down in Louisiana. The same girlfriend that he hadn't talked to since 4:25 that afternoon. He had not even confirmed that Chiquita was coming because Chiquita had given up on him in that text. 4 minutes later, he does call Chiquita. But at that point, he's going to try to get Chiquita up here. From 7:42 to 7:46, it's very important that Quentin told us exactly when we interviewed him, what were you doing during that time? Well, I was walking to my sister's house to get her car. Do we know that happened? Yes, we do. Quentin didn't have a vehicle transportation, automobile. Quentin borrowed Reagan's car at her house after that 7:46. And at that point, do we see him strike out to Batesville to go get the green dot? No. During that time, we know that the individuals from the Tellis home have all moved to the store. You see that 7:38 when Becky actually comes over to the store. Miss Rebecca. Miss Rebecca's in the store. Shalanda Sanford's in the store from that driveway behind. Poo-Poo, I believe her name is La Quinta, is in the store from that drive behind or from Becky's house. All of them are in that store. Right after he tells you he walked to Reagan's home and he borrowed Reagan's car from 742 to 746, at 750, we see a vehicle pull into the Telus driveway, and it barely pulls in that driveway and stops. You've seen the coverage, the footage, you've seen the video. You have it with you. It stops right there at the front of that driveway where we know that that shed is. It stops for about 90 seconds. It stops for enough time to get out and get that gas can. Because whose gas can, who do we know knows exactly where that gas can is, and who told us who that gas can belonged to? Quentin Telus. At 7:52, that vehicle departs. Paul Rowlett told you 3 to 4 minutes. I want you to remember that time, down to the crime scene. Quentin Telus went down to that crime scene and lit this child on fire. At 8 o'clock, Quentin Telus makes a call on his phone. He is in Cortland on that Cortland tower that covers Cortland and that crime scene. 3 to 4 minutes, remember that, what Paul Rowlett told you. At 8:04, 4 minutes after that initial call to Chiquita, what do we see at the store? We see a white SUV pass, and Paul froze that for you where you can see it. They showed that to Quentin, and they also showed him his phone, his cell site data, and they said, "Is that probably you?" And he said, "Yes." And when I say probably you, we're tracking his phone to make sure that that is the exact way he is moving. And at 8:08, 4 minutes later, he hits that Batesville Tower, which means at 8 o'clock he's in Cortland, at 8:04 he's driving by that store, and at 8:08 he's now in the area of Batesville, coming into Batesville. What do we also know at 8:04? The exact time that he passes by the front of that store, Jessica's phone shuts off. Jessica's phone was in direct exposure to the heat from that fire, and that is the last evidence we see of Jessica Chambers' phone ever. Quentin Telus proceeds into Batesville. We know he actually went to Piggly Wiggly first, attempted to get a Western Union. They were closed. He moves over to Fred's, buys a green dot. I put the green dot information in specifically so you can see how it works. He sends that green dot at 8:26. That green dot has to be forwarded on to Chiquita and then loaded by Chiquita. It was 9:53 at night when Chiquita finally got that money. 9:53, somebody 4 hours away finally got the money that she would have needed to come up here. We also know, based on what Quentin finally told us, she didn't come up, it was too late. But Quentin Telus told us, "Good night, sweet dreams, babe. My girl's coming up tonight," or whatever he said, "Friend's coming up tonight. I'll call you tomorrow." This is all for somebody that he told us was 4 hours away, never had the money, and never showed up. Finally, when Quentin Telus leaves Batesville, he goes back to Cortland. He goes back to Cortland, drops his sister's car off, goes home, and we see him again on M&M video. And you'll have to correct my times. It's around 8:53, 8:57. In 31 minutes, Quentin Telus told you that he did all that, went home, changed clothes, took a bath. But let's also not forget, when we see him at Piggly Wiggly before, he had also gotten rid of that coat that he already had on. He takes a bath, changes clothes that he had on that morning, and walks over to M&M convenience store. Ladies and gentlemen, I relay to you now that what the exchange in that store is something you need to pay attention to. Quentin Telus went in that store, bought 2 drinks. You can see the guy in the background, pointing south. I mean, obviously something has gone on. And Cortland's not very big, okay? We all probably live in small communities, start with a lot bigger than here, but Quentin Tellis looked at that guy, looked away, walked to the door, turned around and looked at him again. Quentin Tellis wants you to believe that that is the first time that he heard about Jessica Chambers being set on fire. This was, Vince wants you to believe, his friend. This was somebody that he cared about. He wants you to believe. He has absolutely zero reaction to learning that Jessica Chambers was set on fire. Nothing. He has zero reaction to learning that Jessica Chambers set on fire. He already knew. He knew this girl was on fire. Hearing it from that guy in the store didn't tell him anything. If he wants you to believe that this is the first time he found out about it, what does he do? Does he make one phone call, one text message to her, her family members, her friends, whoever, to find out how this girl's doing? No, not a bit. In fact, what does he do? He goes back to texting and calling the other girls. He moved on. And then he turned around and deleted every bit of information he had from Jessica Chambers' phone, in his phone regarding Jessica Chambers. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard all this evidence. You've seen the evidence. You've seen all the data analyzed and the movements that were conducted within this time period. I told you in the beginning that I wanted you to have a clean slate, and I think you did, and I appreciate it. I told you that we would begin to paint that slate as we move through this process. At this point, I told you that I was confident that when this trial was finished, that you would be able to pick that slate up and put it in front of your face and see a picture of Quentin Tellis. I believe we have proven every element required, and I contend to you that we have proven every element required to prove him guilty of capital murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you, Your Honor.